Sorry about that. Attendees may not erect any signage inside or outside the meeting room or the building. Attendees are not entitled, did you find it? To be disorderly or disruptive in the meeting or for the proceeding. We must be efficient and effective in all our fashions. We cannot tolerate disruptive behavior that may result in recess or removal from the meeting. Possession or any use of any device that may disrupt the conduct of business is prohibited, including but not limited to voice amplification equipment, bullhorns, blowhorns, sirens, and other noise-producing devices, as well as signs on sticks, poles, and stakes or helium-filled balloons. All attendees are asked to be very respectful of all speakers. Rules will be enforced fairly and impartially, not only to ensure the efficient and effective conduction of business, but also to ensure no interference with the business of the complex, its employees, or its guests. Attendees wishing to record the proceedings are welcome to do so. However, you may not interfere with the business of the meeting, nor impede the view or participation of other meeting attendees and staff. No smoking is allowed unless in a designated outside space. This includes tobacco and e-cigarettes. No alcohol, fireworks, pyrotechnics, weapons, or any substances, items controlled by law are allowed. No firearms are allowed in the state's contracted spaces except for firearms carried by law enforcement officers or authorized security personnel. All violators may be subject to removal from the meeting facility. Anyone removed from the facility may not re-enter. Anyone who fails to comply with removal may be charged with trespassing. And so that takes care of all of our rules for the day. I hope you got those memorized. And also, no comment today on Mountain Valley Pipeline. So we will take on, when we take on public forum, just so everyone knows, that's on the agenda for an update. Okay, moving along to the minutes.
Madam Chairman, can I have the floor for a second?
Yes, Mr. Dunn.
For various reasons, we have not elected a vice chair for the State Water Control Board. Therefore, I move that we elect Scott Cameron for vice chair of the State Water Control Board.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. So let's move along to the minutes. Those are in your board book under tab A, and those are all should be addressed, I guess. So is any questions or comments on those? And if not, I'll entertain a motion to accept these minutes as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on the minutes. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, motion carries to accept the minutes as presented. Next, we have in your board book under tab B, Ms. Johnson, do you have anything you need to tell us today?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. I submitted to DEQ staff a signed transactional disclosure statement pursuant to the Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act before participating in voting on these agenda items. I have a personal interest affected by the transactions being considered because of my employment as county administrator in Charles City County. Charles City County, like other Virginia localities, holds a VIPTES permit and groundwater withdrawal permits, administers a Virginia Stormwater Management Program, a Virginia Erosion and Sediment Program, and is subject to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Designation and Management Regulations, sewage collection and treatment regulations, and water quality standards specific to the Chesapeake Bay and its tidal tributaries. I am able to participate in agenda items tabs B, C, D, E, H. I, K, L, and M fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So moving along to tab B, final exemption regulations. That's Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation 9, VAC 25875. Amendment to the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation 9, VAC 25-875 in response to Chapters 5 and 104 House Bill 656 of the 2024 Acts of the General Assembly of Virginia. Scott Morris.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. I have the pleasure of going over the final exempt amendments in response to the 2024 Virginia Acts of Assembly. The first item I want to go over is the final exempt amendment to the Virginia Erosion and Sediment Management Regulation 9 VAC 25 TAC 875.
Mr. Morris, your microphone, please.
It's on.
Is it on? Is that better?
Oh, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. First thing I would like to go over is the final exempt amendment to the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation 9 VAC 25 TAC 875 in response to Chapters 5 and 104 of the 2024 Virginia Acts of Assembly. As you know, this was kind of done to correct the chicken or egg scenario. These bills established a sequence where a locality will review and approve erosion and sediment control plans and then obtain evidence of stormwater permit coverage before issuing its land disturbance approval. What I have here is the exact language change. So you can see it says for sites requiring coverage under the general VPDS permit for discharge of stormwater for construction activities, the VSCP authority shall obtain evidence of such permit coverage from the department's online reporting system prior to issuing its land disturbance approval. It's statutory authority. The amendments are exempt from the requirements of Article 2 of the Administrative Process Act pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2 TAC 4006A4A. Final exempt amendments to the Virginia Erosion and Sediment Control Management Act in response to the Chapters 5 and 104 of the 2024 General Assemblies. That covers that material. Do you have any general questions on those?
Any questions for Mr. Morris this time? You may proceed.
Staff recommendations are to adopt the revisions of 9 VAC 25 TAC 875 TAC 300 as final regulations and affirm that the board will receive, consider, and respond to the petitions by the interested person at any time with respect to the reconsideration or revisions. Well, you gotta, do you want to go over all of type B, or you want to do them as a block, or?
I don't know. I need advice on that one.
I would prefer that you do each recommendation and do a
Separately.
separate vote.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
All right, that's what we'll do.
Madam Chairman, I move that we accept the staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendation. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. You may proceed. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So we'll go over to item C. And this is the final exempt amendments to the Virginia Pollution Discharge Elimination System, VPS Permit 9 VAC 25 TAC 31, Virginia Pollution Abatement VPA Permit Regulation 9 VAC 25 TAC 32, so Sewage Collection and Treatment Regulation 9 VAC 25 790, in response to Chapters 178 of the 2024 Virginia Acts of Assembly. As you've been briefed, and it's in the board book, this Chapter 178 of the 2024 Acts of Assembly allows DEQ the ability to waive the wastewater operator requirement under certain conditions. That is my operator's license, so just as an FYI, I'm a licensed Class 1 operator in the state of Virginia. And it allows for the unexpected vacancy due to death, firing of cause, resignation, or similar actions. It allows the treatment work owner to notify the department promptly within 5 days of the vacancy and of the interim operator. And allows the treatment operator or works to identify a plan and notify the department within 10 days of the vacancy that they implement the plan. And it also requires them to provide monthly progress updates. And then Chapter 178 of the 2024 Acts of Assembly allows DEQ to consider remote monitoring to meet the operator class requirements, provided the following occurs. The facility is equipped with adequate technology capacities. The owner submits and the department approves a remote monitoring plan demonstrating the facility possesses sufficient technologies and direct supervision of a lower licensed class mechanic or other staff operating the facility. And that is statutory language concerning wastewater operators license requirements were inserted in the following sections: 9 VAC 2531 TAC 200 C4 and 5, 9 VAC 25 TAC 32 TAC 190 D and E, 9 VAC 25 790 TAC 300 D1 and D3. And again, the statutory authority, the amendments are exempt from the requirements of Article 2 of the Administrative Process Act pursuant to Code 2.2 TAC 4006 A4A. Are there any questions associated with this?
Any questions?
Madam Chair, I do have one question. As far as the waiver is concerned, how long is that waiver? I didn't see a designated time.
So that waiver actually has a lot of flexibility in it. We're in the process right now of creating the form that would be used for those facilities. But in essence, that waiver is open-ended. It allows the operator or the facility owner to say that they basically put in a course of action to replace the entity. That could be going through an advertisement for a job vacancy.
Okay.
It could be going through a different recruitment process. The only requirement is that they do the monthly update, and so that we get a constant status upgrade. Now, obviously, if the owner of that facility does not follow through with those, the waiver can be revoked.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? You may proceed.
We're recommending the adopt provisions of 9 VAC 31 TAC 200, 9 VAC 25 TAC 32 TAC 190, and 9 VAC 790 TAC 300 as final regulations, and affirm that the board will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any interested person at the time with respect to reconsideration or revisions.
Madam Chair, I move we accept the staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
We're going to move forward with item E. Final exempt amendments to the Virginia Water Protection VWP Permit Program Regulation 9 VAC 25210 and groundwater permit regulations in response to Chapters 251 of the 2024 Virginia Act of Assembly. Chapter 251 of the 2024 Virginia Act of Assembly authorized DEQ to use and incorporate comprehensive groundwater, surface water, and aquifer data in its surface water and groundwater permit decisions. We've added 2 new sections, 9 VOC 25 TAC 210 TAC 315, use of data in permit decision of surface waters, and we've amended 9 VAC 25 610 TAC 110 to include evaluation criteria for permit applications submitted to the following statutory language, which is basically saying that the department is authorized to use and incorporate comprehensive groundwater, surface water, and aquifer data in its permit decision, and such data may be included for information related to water levels, flow rates, and water quality. Just as an informational component, we have done this in the past. This just reaffirms our ability to do that. The statutory authority, again, is the amendments are exempt from the requirements of Article 2 of the Administrative Process Act pursuant to Code 2.2 TAC 4006 A4A. Any questions regarding this proposed amendment?
Any questions? Don't look like it. I'll entertain a vote.
Motion for approval,
Just
Madam
staff
Chair.
recommendations first. Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Staff recommendations is to adopt the revisions of 9 VOC 25 TAC 210 TAC 315 and 9 VOC 25 TAC 210 TAC 110 as final regulations, and affirm the board will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any interested person at the time with respect to reconsideration or revisions.
Thank you.
Madam
Now
Chairman,
I'll
I move
entertain a
we-
motion.
Madam Chairman, I move we approve staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussions? Hearing none,
Okay.
I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Morris.
Okay.
All right, where are we next? I have lost all my tabs
We
and
went through
everything
B,
today.
C, and D.
Yes.
We're now going to E, and they're going to hand that out to you.
I thought you said we were over on E, so I apologize.
I misspoke.
Thanks, sir.
I hope that's not me making that.
I don't think so. Don't know where it's coming from, though.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'd like to go over the final exempt amendments for the corrections in response to the consolidation bill and Virginia erosion and stormwater management regulation that's becoming effective July 1st, 2024. It's a nice little picture going over stormwater for your visual pleasure. As you may be familiar with, in response to the consolidation bill that comes July 1st, there's several sections that need to be revised to correct technical items, and those technical items basically are the references to 9 VOC 875. You can look at here, it goes over Article 2, Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Act, Article 2.4, Erosion and Sediment Control Law for localities not administered Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Program. These are the explicit sections that are going to be updated. So VPDS permit regulation 9 VAC 25 TAC 31, VPDS general permit regulation of seafood processing facilities 9 VAC 25 TAC 115, VPDS general permit regulation for stormwater discharge associated with industrial activity 9 VAC 25 TAC 151, the Virginia water protection permit regulation 9 VAC 25 TAC 220, and the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act designation and management regulation 9 VAC 25 830. The general VPDS permit for discharge of stormwater and small MS4s, 9 VAC 25 TAC 890, and certification of non-point source nutrient credits, 9 VAC 25 TAC 900. The amendments include, as I referenced before, updating citations, changing 9 VAC 840 to 9 VAC 875, changing 9 VAC 25 870 to 9 VOC 25 875, updating names to reflect the new naming convention, Stormwater Management Act to Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Act, Erosion and Sediment Control Law for localities not administered Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Program, Virginia Stormwater Management Program to VSMP to Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Program or VSMP, and correcting the website address that the Virginia Stormwater BMP Clearinghouse is, and revising terminology to comply with the state law requirements. Again, the amendments are exempt from the requirements of Article 2 of the Administrative Process Act pursuant to 2.2 TAC 4006A3 of the Code of Virginia because they are consistent with only changes that are in style or form collections of technical errors. Any questions related to this proposed amendment?
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Morris at this point?
Madam Chair, I had one quick question. Under the permanent waivers, it states permanent waivers are only available to facilities and entities owned or operated by members of religious communities. Is tribal communities included in that, or just religious communities?
I don't know.
Sorry.
I'm going to have to defer to Melanie Davenport for tribal. You want to step up, Melanie?
Madam Chairman, I'm at a slight disadvantage because I don't have regs and code in front of me. I am going to say it is an exemption that applies to religious communities who have a different government relationship to state regulations. I also know that there is actually a legislative work group that is kind of combing through the Code of Virginia to make changes wherever necessary to incorporate the fact that there are now federally recognized environmental tribes. Because when you read the code, for example, it talks about localities. It doesn't say anything about federally recognized tribes.
right.
And that's an effort that's been underway a couple of years. I am going to say no, but would absolutely follow up if it turns out that my answer is incorrect.
Okay, thank you so much. I have a federally recognized tribe in Charles City, and that always makes me think that. Thank you.
Any more questions? You may proceed.
Staff recommendation is to adopt amendments to the following as final regulations: BPDS Permit Regulation 9, VAC 25, TAC 31, BPDS General Permit Regulation for Seafood Processing Facilities, 9 VAC 25, TAC 115, BPDS General Permit Regulation for Stormwater Discharge associated with industrial activity, 9 VAC 25, TAC 151, the Virginia Water Protection Permit Regulation, 9 VAC 25, TAC 220, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Designation and Management Regulation, 9 VAC 25, 830, General VPDS Permit for Discharges of Stormwater from Small MS4s, 9 VAC 25, 890, and certification of non-point source nutrient credits, 9 VAC 25, TAC 900, and affirm that the board will receive, consider, and respond to a position by any interested person at any time with respect to the reconsideration or revision.
I need
Madam Chair, I move we accept the staff recommendation.
I have a motion. I need a second.
Second. Oh,
I got a second. No problem. Any further discussion? I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving along to tab F, Mr. Williams. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the State Water Control Board. I am Justin Williams, Manager for the Office of Watersheds and Local Government Assistance. Today, I'm presenting waste load allocations for inclusion in the water quality management planning regulations for the board's consideration, specifically resulting from 2 total maximum daily load, or TMDL, studies, and which are necessary pursuant to state and federal mandates to improve water quality. I will specifically cover the river basins for amendment, laws requiring total maximum daily loads to address these impairments, a brief overview of our water quality improvement process and TMDL process, the specific waste load allocations for the board's considerations, including additional backgrounds on polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, which are being considered for the board's action today as well. State and federal law both require that TMDLs are developed to establish and improve water quality of impaired water bodies. The regulations and the board's amendments are divided among basins throughout the Commonwealth. Presented today are 9 waste load allocations in the James River Basin and 1 new waste load allocation in the Rappahannock River Basin. These cover total 9 new waste load allocations in the James River and 1 new waste load allocation in the Rappahannock River. Total maximum daily loads are all part of the overall water quality improvement process. As the board is aware, the department, through the Water Quality Monitoring and Assessment Program, identifies impaired water bodies throughout the Commonwealth and establishes, pursuant to the 303D list, those impaired water bodies needing to be improved. Pursuant to that process, then, total maximum daily loads are developed, or cleanup studies are identified to include both waste load allocations and load allocations, addressing and identifying the necessary actions to improve that water quality. Waste load allocations, which are adopted by the board, are then incorporated through permitting actions. Load allocations are addressed through cleanup or implementation plans to address primarily non-point source funding, non-point sources. And then funding is identified through federally available 319 funds. Specifically with total maximum daily loads and waste allocations, as a part of the cleanup study, the overall existing load or amount of pollution that is going into a water body is identified using a stakeholder process and data along with modeling. Then, as a part of that study and process, the causes, sources, loadings, and necessary reductions to improve the impairment and improve water quality are identified. This establishes overall what is identified as the total maximum daily load endpoint, which consists of the waste load allocations presented for the board today, the load allocation as mentioned, which are primarily driven by and identified for non-point sources, and then a margin of safety as a part of that equation process to ensure overall that in combination, the endpoint will address the water quality impairment. Specifically presented for the board today in the James River tributaries water bodies area are waste load allocations resulting for and necessary for sediment and phosphorus, inclusive of Bailey Creek, Nut Tree Branch, Old Town Creek, Proctors Creek, Rowick Creek, and Swift Creek. These watersheds are located in Chesterfield, Dinwiddie, and Prince George counties, and the cities of Petersburg, Colonial Heights, and Hopewell. These 6 segments cover approximately 54 stream miles. The overall impairments in these water bodies are driven by too much sediment in all segments and too much phosphorus in 3 segments. Non-point sources, including urban and stream bank erosion, are significant sources, with the permitted sources for the waste load allocation accounting for 24 to 54% of the loading across the watersheds. Among the sources, there are 8 MS4s and 5 industrial stormwater, specifically in Rowick Creek, that will have waste load allocations as a result of this action, but none throughout the stakeholder process identified concerns over the ability to implement. And the specific reductions necessary are presented in the board materials and the table above. The other action for the board's consideration that is somewhat unique to the traditional or typical TMDLs presented is relative to polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs. These compounds are entirely man-made, and approximately 1.5 billion pounds were manufactured in the U.S. until 1977. There is still today inadvertently generated PCBs at defined concentrations under certain conditions with requirements established by the Environmental Protection Agency. But overall, it is a largely legacy contaminant. It is very stable, heat resistant, and persistent in the environment. Commonly was used in electrical type products such as transformers, circuit breakers, PCB products, chalking materials, and paints. These continue to be an issue and consideration for concern because of the potential human health impact. Fish consumption provides a significant exposure pathway, as illustrated in the presentation. It is a suspected carcinogen, as well as has other health risks, including potential effects for reproduction and development. And it can bioaccumulate at low concentrations and magnified. And there are indeed confirmed ongoing releases as a result of historical use. Specifically, there has already been other PCB TMDLs developed in the state, including, for example, in the Roanoke and Rappahannock rivers. And today, for presentation and consideration by the board, is a waste load allocation for PCB in the Mountain Run watershed. This is included in the Culpeper County, Virginia area and covers approximately 26 stream miles. Sources include contaminated sites, unregulated runoff, and permitted sources. Among the sources, there are 7 facilities with industrial stormwater GPs that will need to reduce their PCB discharges, on average about 55%, ranging between 2 and 86%. This will be done through permit conditions, specifically a pollutant minimization plan, which identifies and incorporates activities into the stormwater permit using DEQ resources and guidance to identify ways to reduce potential PCB runoff from those sites. As always, these TMDLs were developed in the corresponding studies and waste load allocations identified through a public participation process. This includes following specific public participation procedures, including a 30-day comment on the TMDL report. Overall, between the two TMDLs, there were 3 comments received, 2 for the benthic of the James River area watershed waste load allocation, and 1 for the PCB. All were appropriately addressed, and then the waste load allocations prior to the board's consideration today were published for regulatory amendment in the Virginia Register, and no additional comments were received. All of these TMDLs had at least 4 stakeholder meetings, with the PCB and TMDL engaging 3 to 11 stakeholders throughout that process, and the James River area benthic engaging 15 to 46 stakeholders throughout that process, with consideration and feedback considered throughout. The specific final consideration for public participation ran March 25th through April 24th, and again, with no comments received. The action for the board's consideration under the statutory authority is based upon Article 2 of the Administrative Process Act 2.24 A14, which provides an exemption from the overall APA process. This is specific to the development of waste load allocations. Does the board have any questions?
Are there any questions for Mr. Williams? Hearing none. Proceed, please.
Madam Chair and Board, the staff recommendation is that the board amend Water Quality Management Planning Regulation 9 VAC 25720 to include the TMDL waste load allocations as shown in Attachment 2 of the board book material, and affirm that the board will receive, consider, and respond to any petitions by interested persons at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision.
Madam Chair, I move we accept the staff recommendation.
I have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendations. Any further discussions from this board? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're moving along to tab G in your board book. Final regulations. Ms. Bowles.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
I'm sorry.
No, you are correct. I just want to let you know, before the board does hear the staff recommendation, there are a couple individuals that have signed up to speak.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Director Rolban. I am Betsy Bowles, and I am the Animal Feeding Operations Program Coordinator. I'm here this morning to present the final amendments of the Virginia Pollution Abatement Regulation and General Permit for Animal Feeding Operations and Animal Waste Management, 9 VAC 25-192-10 et sec. The general permit is the primary permit mechanism for covering animal feeding operations that confine livestock such as swine, dairy, and beef cattle. And currently there are 108 covered animal feeding operations. The general permit expires on November 15th, 2024, and must be reissued to ensure current and new animal feeding operations are covered under the permit. The regulations also include technical regulations which cover unpermitted end users of animal waste. The notice of intended regulatory action was published on January 30th, 2023, with a 60-day comment period, which ended on March 31st, 2023. There were 10 commenters or organizations whom submitted comments. The NOR comments and DEQ staff responses are included in the agency background document in your board package. The committee, we formed a technical advisory committee, and the committee was made up of permitted animal feeding operation owners, agricultural organizations, and environmental organizations. And staff held 2 technical advisory committee meetings, one in June and one in July of 2023. The proposed regulation was approved by the State Water Control Board in August of 2023, and the 60-day comment period ended March 15th, 2024. The details of the amendments are included in your agency background document, and the final amendments include: defined terms were amended, references and citations were updated, groundwater monitoring permit requirements were amended, animal waste storage conditions in the general permit and regulation were amended, a permit condition to submit the nutrient management plan by the permittee was added, The conditions applicable to the permit found in Part 2 were amended, and language was revised throughout the general permit to improve the clarity and readability of the permit requirements and regulation, and in some cases, these were based on the Register of Regulations requirements set forth in the style manual. Specifically in Section D, new terms were added. There were 5 terms added to clarify the meaning of the term when used throughout the regulation. These terms include general permit, land application, permittee, state water control law, and treatment works. There were 5 terms amended. As agricultural stormwater discharge, it was amended to clarify the definition. Animal feeding operation was amended to make the definition more consistent with the law. Confined animal feeding operation was amended for consistency with the formatting of other definitions. Director was amended for consistency with other regulations. And nutrient management plan was amended for consistency with the rest of the regulation. Also in Section 10, the definition sections were 2 defined terms already in the regulation. Those were moved into Section 10 for consistency with other regulations. Generally, our definitions stay in Section 10. In Section 70 of the general permit, as contents of the general permit, there were 2 groundwater monitoring permit conditions added to clarify the requirements. One condition outlines when a permittee is required to submit a groundwater monitoring action plan. Groundwater monitoring action plan is required when monitoring results demonstrate a potential non-compliance. Analysis of ammonia nitrogen and nitrate nitrogen shall be performed by a lab accredited under the Virginia Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program in accordance with 1 VAC 30-46-20. Also in the contents of the general permit, the animal waste storage permit requirements were amended for consistency with the VPA general permit for poultry waste management, non-VAC 25-630-10 et sec. The language to clarify which tools are to be used to determine the floodplain when siting animal waste storage facilities was added. Permit conditions outlining adequate storage of semi-solid and solid waste was amended. A new condition that addresses situations where an animal waste storage is threatened by emergencies such as fire and flood was added. And also a requirement to notify the department when prior to closing a liquid waste storage facility was added. Also in Section 70, a condition was added to require the permittee to submit their revised nutrient management plan within 30 days of DCR approval. This was added to make the current department requirements clear to the permittee. This condition was further amended after the proposed stage based on the public comments. In Part 2 of the permit, the conditions were amended, reorganized, and renumbered for consistency with the VPA regulation, non-VAC 25-32, and VPA regulation and general permit for poultry waste management, non-VAC 25-630-10 et sec. In Section 90, storage requirements for transferred animal waste. These conditions were amended to mirror the conditions being amended in the permit and for consistency with the VPA regulation and general permit for poultry waste management, non-VAC 25-630-10 et sec. The public comments and public hearing, the public notice was published on January 15, 2024. There was a 60-day public comment period. Staff held 1 public hearing on March 5th, 2024, and 1 citizen representing an agricultural organization attended and presented comments. There were 6 individuals and organizations that submitted comments. 1 organization submitted on behalf of 4 environmental organizations. The comments and the department's responses are included in the agency background document, and we have not received any feedback from those commenters since the board book has been made public. 3 farmers submitted comments some of their comments were in support of the reissuance of the general permit for another 10-year period, the provisions to manage manure storage in the event of an imminent breach due to no fault of the manager, and the allowance for land application of manure in an emergency situation. Their comments in opposition of were in opposition of new mandatory groundwater monitoring. Additionally, they asked the department to consider only making changes that are rooted in science, acknowledge the volatility of the livestock industry, and understand that farmers will need to fund any changes to their operations if additional requirements were included. Comments were submitted by the agricultural organization. Their comments in support were for the revisions to the continuation of the general permit language, the addition of the groundwater monitoring action plan and laboratory accreditation conditions, the addition of waste storage siting and waste storage closure condition, the addition of emergency requirements for land application. Their comments were in opposition of the requirements requested by other commenters related to waste storage construction, waste storage inspections, waste storage closure, groundwater monitoring, and electronic submission of monitoring data and nutrient management plans. Public comments received by or from an environmental organization were in support of the concept of a groundwater monitoring corrective action plan, the submission of the nutrient management plan to the department. Their comments requested further changes to the amendments related to waste storage construction, waste storage inspections, waste storage closure, groundwater monitoring parameters, electronic submission of monitoring data and nutrient management plans, land application buffers, the time frame to maintain records, notifications of unauthorized discharges, public notice requirements, surface water monitoring, defining 25-year, 24-hour storm, and permit application information. Comments submitted by another environmental organization requested further changes to the amendments related to groundwater monitoring wells, groundwater monitoring results, groundwater monitoring parameters and limits, submission of monitoring records, waste storage construction, waste storage inspections, restrictions based on environmental justice indices from the EPA, and to define flood. There were changes made since the proposed stage, and since that time, changes were made to non-VAC 25192-50C, which is language related to the continuation of the general permit coverage. It includes removing unnecessary language to improve readability and deleting board and replacing it with the department. Changes made to during the proposed stage were in response to comments. Changes were made to Part 1C2 and Part 3C2 of non-VAC 25-19270 related to the submittal of the nutrient management plan. The revised language requires the submittal to be within 30 days after the plan is approved by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. This revision allows the permittee to get the full use of the nutrient management plan and address any issues with timing for the development and approval of the nutrient management plan that are beyond the control of the permittee. There were comments received that requested further changes that the agency did not make changes based on the comments for the following reasons. Many of the requests for further changes were outside the scope of this regulatory action, to include when the statute specifies requirements that limit changes to the regulation, when the VPA-based regulation is the basis for the permit conditions, and when the requirements originate from the nutrient management regulations that are administered by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So making changes outside requirements established by the statute or regulations will create inconsistencies. Many of the requests for the further changes are already covered under the current language or the final amendments, such as the existing or amended conditions exist in the general permit. The VPA-based regulation contains the definition. The general permit covers facilities with no point source discharge to state waters, and the director has the authority to require an individual permit. It's not necessary to make the further changes to address these requests. You have any questions?
Any questions for the,
I have one. If I understand correctly, the final proposal, you received a lot of comments, and all your comments were no changes being made. And my understanding is you got no comments based on not making changes. That kind of surprised me. Did that surprise you?
I'm not sure I understand what your question is.
If you go through here where you make, where you put the final proposal out, you got some comments on that. And your response was no changes are being made to address these comments. Tons of them. And I asked if you got any comments from the public on not making changes, and my answer that I got was, no, the public did not comment on your response. And that kind of surprised me since there were so many comments made.
Yes.
Does that surprise you?
That it doesn't surprise me right now because of the time frame of when it was sent out to the public, our agency responses. It's the timing, they would have the time now to make those comments.
But Madam Chair,
Okay.
if I may, just because someone makes a comment and suggests a change does not mean that the staff should act on that. They should act within the authority that they have and the regulatory notice that we've given. And I assume that's what you were doing here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
and that's
Yeah, I understand
that's
that.
the way I took
My
it.
question was, I would have expected some of the public to comment on why you didn't make changes, but nobody made any comments at all, which kind of made it void.
Yeah, not so far.
Any more questions from Ms. Bowles? And we have speakers?
Yes, ma'am, we have two individuals that have signed up to speak to the board today before you take an action. Both of these individuals commented on the proposed regulation. The first speaker, they have 3 minutes, is Tony Banks. If you'd come to the podium, please, affiliated with the Virginia Farm Bureau. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Tony Banks. I'm an employee of the Virginia Farm Bureau Federation, and I reside in Prince George County, and I submitted comments in favor of the proposed regulations and would argue that we support the amendments that have been presented by staff today before this board. And so we are in support as is. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second individual that commented on the proposed regulation that is here today to speak is Patrick Fanning, CBF.
Hi, thanks. Good morning, Patrick Fanning with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And to Mr. Dunn's point, we did get the board packet same time you did, so limited amount of time to provide feedback, but we did participate in the stakeholder group last summer. We submitted comments on the NOIRA. We also submitted comments on the proposed changes to the regulation. And as you pointed out, we recommended about 10 proposed changes, and none of those changes were incorporated, which is not uncommon, but there's one change in particular that I want to draw your attention to that I think is just a bad take and a misinterpretation of the law. So if you care to follow along, this would be on page 31 of the agency background document, and it relates to groundwater monitoring for earthen lagoons. And the comment that we submitted along with some of our partner organizations was that there are many earthen lagoons that are covered by this permit that are over 25 years old, that were constructed with less stringent construction requirements than would be required for new lagoons. In other words, these are the lagoons that are most likely to be discharging to groundwater. But the permit imposes no groundwater monitoring requirements for these lagoons. And we pointed this out throughout this entire process and said, at a minimum, you should be requiring some groundwater monitoring for these types of lagoons. These are the ones that are most likely to be discharging to groundwater. And the response, as you can see on page 31, is that requiring groundwater monitoring wells is not consistent with the requirements established by the Code of Virginia. And that is simply not true. The Code of Virginia, in the authorizing statute for this permit, empowers DEQ and the board to impose any additional monitoring requirements, including for groundwater, as required to protect state waters. Now, you'll also see in the response that DEQ says, well, if there's a problem, we will require an individual permit. Well, how would DEQ ever know if there's a problem if they're not requiring monitoring? So my request to the board would be to seek the advice of council as to the authority that the board has to impose groundwater monitoring requirements and to impose groundwater monitoring for these older legacy lagoons. And we would recommend at least one upgradient groundwater monitoring site and 2 downgradient, which is consistent with our other requests. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions?
Madam Chairman, I'd be interested in the staff response to Mr. Fanning's observation.
So the law is specific that says when we can require groundwater monitoring, and that is when we encounter when during construction that they encounter the seasonal high water table during construction. If that's not encountered, then we cannot require the groundwater monitoring. So when our understanding of the law for being able to require more groundwater monitoring is if they are already monitoring, but there is a change that we need to up that or increase that from one every 3 years to more frequent. So if they already meet the requirement to have the groundwater monitoring first.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you. Do we have another presenter or another commenter? Is that it, too? Okay, thank you. Ms. Bowles, you may continue.
All right. Staff recommends that the board adopt the final amendments to the Virginia Pollution Abatement Regulation and General Permit for animal feeding operations and animal waste management as presented, and affirm they will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision of the regulation as provided by the Administrative Process Act.
I have staff recommendation. Do I hear a motion?
Move for approval.
I've got a motion to approve. I need a second.
Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Bowles.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to call on Brandon Bull, please.
Madam Chair? if
Yes,
I
sir.
may. Obviously, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation sees the law differently than our state. So if the attorney that's with DEQ would review it and send them a letter explicitly explaining what the law is, I think it might be helpful for them.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I will also ask that staff takes care of your request. Mr. Bull?
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Brandon Bull. I'm Director of the Policy Division at DEQ. The next 3 items on your agenda are fast-track regulations. Since it has been a while since a fast-track regulation was before this board, we just wanted to give you all a very brief overview of the process. The fast track process pursuant to the Administrative Process Act is for regulations that are expected to be non-controversial. The way it would work is if the board adopts a fast track regulation today, it would be submitted for executive review. It gets published in the Virginia Register. There's a 30-day comment period. And then 15 days after the close of the comment period, unless the agency specifies a later date, it would become effective unless there are certain objections that are made during the comment process. If those objections are made, then the fast track serves as the NOIRA and a standard rulemaking would begin. Unless there are, I'll pause there and ask if there are any questions on the process.
Anyone have any questions?
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So moving over to tab H, we'll begin our fast track regulations presented by Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Bryant Thomas. I manage the Office of Ecology in the Water Planning Division for DEQ. And I'm here to speak with you regarding proposed fast track regulation. It pertains to modification of implementation requirements for criteria specific to the Chesapeake Bay and its tidal tributaries. Do I have the clicker here, or are you guys advancing slides? There you go. Good. By way of background, in 2005, the board, State Water Control Board, adopted dissolved oxygen, water clarity, and chlorophyll A standards specifically for the Chesapeake Bay and its tidal rivers. Normally, we do not address implementation requirements in the Water Quality Standards Regulation. However, the Water Quality Standards Regulation does include a reference to criteria assessment procedures which have been published by EPA. This is specific for the Bay criteria noted in the first bullet. The regulation contains language that specifies that Chesapeake Bay criteria should be assessed using the cumulative frequency distribution method. So the cumulative frequency distribution method, or the CFD method, is a statistical tool. It allows for criteria attainment to be expressed in terms of both space and time, as opposed to just time, which is often done with more conventional assessment methods. And those procedures were looking at time or frequency at which monitoring data exceed a threshold. So for example, how often do we observe samples exceeding a threshold or a criterion? We may, for example, establish an allowable exceedance rate of no more than 10% within a given time period. So normally we're looking at the time of exceedance. The CFD methodology looks at space, or considers space, over which an exceedance of a standard is predicted to occur. And I mentioned predicted as that CFD methodology is supported by a model simulation. So the modeling output helps us understand the space over which the exceedance is predicted to occur. This CFD methodology was developed by the Bay program in the late 1990s, and it's the method that the Chesapeake Bay program uses to assess dissolved oxygen criteria specifically. The proposed amendment, because the water quality standards regulations require the use of this CFD method, a regulation change is required for DEQ to use other scientifically valid methods for assessing attainment.
The proposed language would allow the use of the current CFD approach or method, but would also allow for alternative scientifically defensible methods. And for any alternative methods which may be used for attainment determinations, I would note that DEQ prepares a guidance document to support the Water Quality Assessment Integrated Report. This Water Quality Assessment Integrated Report is required by both state and federal law. It is prepared every 2 years, and it includes preparation and publication of a guidance document which specifies our assessment procedures. And this guidance document includes a public review and comment period. Therefore, any future alternative assessment procedures would be made available for public review and comment before being finalized for use in a water quality assessment. And this is a staff-initiated regulatory change, and the change is to provide greater flexibility for implementation and to allow better use of existing data sets. We've identified limitations to this CFD approach. There are data sets available, such as automated high-frequency continuous monitoring. We, DEQ, and some of our partners that we work with in collecting data have these continuous monitoring data sets available. These data sets are not compatible with the CFD approach, so they're not currently used in the attainment evaluation for dissolved oxygen. And I really look at this change as being an evolution of the program. I noted that the CFD approach was developed several decades ago. It's been in place. This is a very good tool and a very good method, but it does have limitations. So I am going to pause right here before we move on to a staff recommendation to see if there's any questions.
Any questions?
Yes, I do have a question, Madam Chairman. So is there an ability to compare the validity of these alternative models against the CFD approach?
That's a really good question. So I would say that oftentimes when we are looking at assessing observational data or water quality data, we often are going to look at a weight of evidence. So we may or may not rely on one tool specifically or one approach specifically, but where we have data across different, let's say, methods or approaches, are they telling us the same answer? Are they pointing to attainment or non-attainment? One of the things that we look at when we're moving forward, particularly with regard to this and incorporating additional procedures, is being able to look at the CFD approach, but also being able to bring in these other data and information we may have. So would it be comparing the outcome of the results? It would, but we would also be looking at trying to move forward with the weight of evidence and basically the best science to move forward with our decisions.
Any further comments or questions for Mr. Thomas?
So the staff recommendation, bear with me, I'm going to read through the whole thing. Authorize DEQ to promulgate the proposed amendment to 9 VAC 25-260-185D3 for public comment using the fast track process established in section 2.2-4012.1 of the Administrative Process Act for regulations expected to be non-controversial. The board's authorization constitutes its adoption of the regulation at the end of the public comment period, provided that, 1, no objection to use of the fast track process is received from 10 or more persons, or any member of the applicable standing committee of either House of the General Assembly or the Joint Commission on Administrative Rules, and 2, DEQ does not find it necessary based on public comments or for any other reason to make any changes to the proposal. And the second aspect of the recommendation, staff also recommends that the board authorize DEQ to set an effective date 15 days after the close of the 30-day comment period, provided 1, the proposal completes the fast track rulemaking process as provided in section 2.2-4012.1 of the Administrative Process Act, and 2, DEQ does not find it necessary to make any changes to the proposal.
We have staff recommendation. I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move we accept the staff recommendation.
I have a motion to accept. I need a second.
Second.
I have a second. Further discussion, please. Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Next, in tab I, Ms. Roche. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Rebecca Roche. I am the Deputy Director for the Division of Water Permitting at DEQ, and I'm here to present you the first fast-track action to amend the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management, or the VESM Regulation 9 VAC 25-875, to remove and update out-of-date requirements. Just a summary on this regulation, Chapter 68 and 758 of the 2016 Acts of Assembly, also known as the Consolidation Bill, combine the Stormwater Management Act and the Erosion and Sediment Control Law to create the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Act, which is effective on July 1st of this year. The attendant regulations are the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management, or again, the VESM regulation, which was approved by this board on June 22nd of last year, and is effective also on July 1st of 2024. The intent of this action is to align the VESM regulation with the department's recently published guidance document, the Virginia Stormwater Management Handbook. Members of the regulated community and other stakeholders have requested these changes to develop and to reflect current practices, technology, and engineering methods. In addition, it removes outdated specifications, some of which are over 30 years old. The revisions to the Virginia runoff reduction method are the result of an evaluation performed by the department in response to Initiative 48 of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan. The purpose and scope of these changes is to update the best management practices and the phosphorus loading rate, to remove requirements that are out of date and burdensome. Section 580 updates the total phosphorus load of new development projects so it accounts for decreased phosphorus use following the 2011 ban on phosphorus, and the revision reflects more accurate and realistic phosphorus loadings. Section 590 removes 15 specifications for best management practices that are dated March of 2011. And the documents incorporated by reference updates the effective date of the Virginia runoff reduction method so it is based on current water quality models and the nutrient loading rate. This fast-track regulatory action will have an effective date of July 1st, 2025 to allow a one-year transition to the stakeholders impacted. Any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Roche?
Madam Chairman, may I comment?
Yes, sir.
I spent the last year serving on the SAG group on rewriting the Virginia Erosion and Sediment Control Handbook. And from experience of dealing with it on a daily basis, Virginia has done an unbelievable job. And I was just talking to Maryland Department of Environment 2 weeks ago, and they're actually a little jealous because all of the things of updating and making clear that we put in Virginia's book, they are now wanting to do it, but the guy I was talking to said, and my estimate is they'll probably get around to it in the next 10 years. So we did one heck of a job. DEQ did a fantastic job on doing something that needed to be done since '92.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for saying so, and very well done. We appreciate your service on that also. You may continue.
Okay, staff recommendation is to authorize DEQ to promulgate the proposal for public comment using the fast track process established in Section 2.2-4012.1 of the Administrative Process Act for regulations expected to be non-controversial. The board's authorization constitutes its adoption of the regulation at the end of the public comment period, provided that 1, no objection to the use of the fast track process is received from 10 or more persons, or any member of the applicable standing committee of either House of the General Assembly or the Joint Commission on Administrative Rules. And 2, DEQ does not find it necessary, based on public comments or for any other reason, to make changes to the proposal. Staff also recommends that the board authorize DEQ to set an effective date of July 1st, 2025, after the close of the public comment period, provided 1, the proposal completes the fast track rulemaking process as provided in Section 2.2-4012.1 of the Administrative Process Act, and 2, DEQ does not find it necessary to make any changes to the proposal.
We have staff recommendation. Board, what's your pleasure?
Madam Chairman, I move we approve staff recommendation.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Our agenda says tab M. So while we have Ms. Roche here, we're going to tab M. Correct? Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
So this is a second fast-track regulatory action to amend the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation 9 VAC 25-875 to make technical corrections. Just to recap, again, the regulatory summary, the consolidation bill combined the Stormwater Management Act and the Erosion Sediment Control Law to create the Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Act. And the attendant regulations are, again, the VESM regulation approved by the board last June, effective July 1st, 2024. The intent of this regulatory action is to correct technical errors that have been identified in the regulations since its publication in the Virginia Register of Regulations on December 4th of 2023. The technical corrections improve clarity and certainty by making the regulation internally consistent. It removes outdated requirements that are no longer applicable, and it accurately reflects the requirements in the State Water Control Law. Here's a couple examples of the types of changes that were made. As you can see, they are generally minor in nature. In sections 70 and 470, a technical correction was made to correct the cross-references to the Chesapeake Bay area requirements. In section 500, a revision was made to clarify that the erosion sediment control plan must be consistent with the erosion and sediment control criteria, techniques, and methods, which are the minimum standards. And again, these are highlighted so you can see that in general they are minor in nature. In total, 17 sections were amended. As indicated on the previous slide, several of the sections and the technical corrections that were made affected more than one section. This fast-track regulatory action will be effective 15 days after the close of the 30-day public comment period. Any questions on this?
Any questions for Ms. Roche? You may proceed.
Okay. Staff recommendation is to authorize DEQ to promulgate the proposal for public comment using the fast track process established in section 2.2-4012.1 of the Administrative Process Act for regulations expected to be non-controversial. The board's authorization constitutes its adoption of the regulation at the end of the public comment period, provided that 1, no objection to the use of the fast track process is received from 10 or more persons or any member of the applicable standing committee of either House of the General Assembly or of the Joint Commission on Administrative Rules. And 2, DEQ does not find it necessary, based on public comments or for any other reason, to make changes to the proposal. Staff also recommends that the board authorize DEQ to set an effective date 15 days after close of the 30-day public comment period,
provided one, the proposal completes the fast-track rulemaking process as provided in Section 2.2-4012.1 of the Administrative Process Act, and two, DEQ does not find it necessary to make any changes to the proposal.
Madam Chair, I move we accept the staff recommendation.
I have a motion to accept staff recommendation. Do I hear a second? Second. I have a second. Any further discussion from this board? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Great,
Thank you. Next, we have on your list of your agenda at tab J, which is proposed regulations, water quality standards, 9VAC-25-260, rulemaking to adopt site-specific selenium aquatic life criteria for 4 streams which are tributaries to Knox Creek in Buchanan County. And that would be Mr. Thomas. And I do apologize to everyone that I've not been reading that, so I've just been letting you lead into it, so I apologize again for not doing my job.
Okay.
Again, good morning. Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Bryant Thomas. I'm here to speak again about amending the water quality standards regulation. This is time to move forward with developing and adopting site-specific criteria for selenium. And this is a request for approval to go to public comment and hearing. As we get into this a little bit, just a little background on selenium. It's a trace element. It can be found in bedrock and underlying geology containing selenium materials and the soils that overlay that geology. It's released into the environment through mining, processing, and use of selenium-containing materials. And in Virginia, we sometimes associate selenium with surface coal mining, burning of coal for power generation, or perhaps coal ash byproducts from coal combustion. Selenium is most commonly found as an impurity in sulfide ores. And it is used in glass making and pigment production, photovoltaic cells, and solar cells, if you will. It is a micronutrient, so it's an essential nutrient, but like many things, too much can have negative effects and have toxic concerns. It bioaccumulates in aquatic environment or aquatic organisms, and our primary concerns are chronic exposures to selenium. It can cause reproductive impairments, larval deformities, mortality, and also adversely affect juvenile fish growth and mortality. A summary or an overview of where we are in the rulemaking process. In April of 2023, we received a petition from Clintwood JOD to promulgate site-specific aquatic life criteria for selenium. This petition was requesting adoption of EPA's 2016 recommended freshwater criteria, and it was for specific tributaries in Knox Creek in Buchanan County. And I'll show a map in just a moment to kind of give you a sense of the location where we're specifically talking. In August of 2023, the State Water Control Board approved the staff recommendation to proceed with rulemaking consistent with the request of the petitioner. In February of this year, the notice of intended regulatory action was published with a 30-day comment period. That comment period ran from February 26 through March 27. And in April of this year, we had a meeting of the Regulatory Advisory Panel. That meeting was held in Grundy, Virginia. The location of this rulemaking, the map on the left shows where Buchanan County is in the Commonwealth, and the map on the right calls out the specific streams or areas of the applicability for the rulemaking as requested by the petitioner. You can see Knox Creek. Knox Creek is flowing northward, so downstream is up, if you will, but flows northward. It flows to Tug Fork, which is located in the Big Sandy Basin, which in turn is part of the Ohio River Basin. It flows north into the downstream states of Kentucky and West Virginia. The tributaries included in this rulemaking and with the request are called out on the map, but they are Race Fork and its tributaries, Pounding Mill Creek and tributaries, Right Fork of Lester Fork and tributaries, and Abner's Fork and tributaries. The 2016 EPA recommended selenium freshwater aquatic life criteria. The first thing I would note is that this is the first aquatic life criterion that uses fish tissue directly as an endpoint. Oftentimes you will see water concentrations of a toxic contaminant, and those concentrations may be back calculated or correlated or even derived from the predicted impacts to fish, but our criteria are normally expressed as water column concentrations. This one is expressed differently, and it's a hierarchical nature. So there's two aspects or two media associated with this: fish, and if data are not available for fish, water. And the hierarchical structure is listed here: fish, egg, ovaries, the whole body or muscle, water column, and then there's also short-term or intermittent exposure calculation. And being a first-time criteria or criterion is recommended for fish tissue, we would note that the implementation, bringing these procedures into our water quality programs, may have some challenges. The 2016 aquatic life criteria, I just mentioned the hierarchical nature, and this shows that top row of the 2016, the magnitude, the recommended criteria. And we do have selenium criteria currently in our water quality standards regulation, and those are listed on the bottom row. And you can see the hierarchy going from the egg ovary to the whole body to the muscle, and then two different water column numbers, one for lentic and another for lotic, which think slow-moving reservoirs, ponds versus flowing waters. Our current criteria, we have chronic criteria that are 4-day averages, and we have acute criteria that's a 1-hour average. If you look at the criteria for the 2016 EPA recommended values, the fish are not to have any exceedances, and the concentrations for the water column are 30-day averages with an intermittent exposure equation for durations that are shorter than 30 days. With regard to the rulemaking, I mentioned the Notice of Intended Regulatory Action comment period, again, was from February 26 through March 27. We received 358 comments supporting the rulemaking. We did not receive any opposing comments. There's the slide notes the organizations that provided comments in support, and I would also note that one of the commenters in support was the Virginia Department of Energy. Virginia Energy is the permitting authority in Virginia for coal surface mining operations. With regard to the comments received during the NOIRA comment period, the supporting rationale was generally summarized here. They are the most recently recommended criteria coming from EPA. Similar values in our downstream states have been adopted and implemented, modeling these criteria. The Virginia coal industry has a substantial impact on the communities and personal livelihood. These criteria provide regulatory flexibility for the coal industry. And I would also note that the implementation be modeled after the existing guidance from the downstream states, particularly West Virginia. I will proceed to some of the discussion and information related to the regulatory advisory panel meeting. It was held in April of this year, as I noted earlier. And consensus was reached on the proposed regulatory language, which is included in your board book. Much of the discussion and the questions were related to the implementation. And while the implementation is where the rubber hits the road, if you will, as far as implementing criteria, the implementation procedures are really not a part of our rulemaking to adopt the criteria themselves. The implementation procedures are developed through the various programs that apply and implement the water quality standards of the water quality criteria. So most notably, the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, Virginia Energy in the coal operations would be the lead agency developing implementation procedures, and DEQ would be for any other dischargers not associated with the coal industry. And then particularly for us as well, our water monitoring and assessment programs. So those procedures for implementation would be developed by the various water quality programs. The organizations represented on the RAP are noted here. We had a broad diversity of representation and expertise. We had several advocacy or non-governmental organizations. We had the coal industry represented as well as the petitioner. We had the federal, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and several Virginia agencies, the Department of Energy, Department of Wildlife Resources, and then one individual citizen involved. So I will pause here to see if there's any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Thomas?
Yes, Madam Chairman. My question is more about selenium more generally rather than the specific regulation. So I noticed from your presentation that selenium is used in photovoltaic and solar cells. We may be looking at somewhere between 100,000 and 600,000 acres of photovoltaics in Virginia. And I'm wondering, do we need to be concerned about selenium leaching from those?
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer. I could speculate, but I think most of these cells are contained, right? And the selenium is used as an ingredient in the manufacture and process.
Okay.
I don't know that the breakdown or release of selenium from those cells it's not something that I have come across or seen as a primary concern. The selenium, most of the time, and in particular with what we're working with now, is working of the materials, right? When you're breaking, crushing, exposing to surface precipitation and the runoff associated with that. Could be with the coal handling or combustion products, byproducts, but I'm going to turn around to see if one of my colleagues has had any exposure to that, and as far as like the leaching or running off associated with the solar fields in the cells, I don't anticipate that to be a concern.
Okay.
But it's a good question.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? I may have one. The citizen commenter, Dr. C. Andrew Dolph.
Yes.
I'm sorry I murdered that name probably, but where was this person from?
He was a retired professor. He had had a fair amount of work in his background associated with selenium. He was representing himself and not any of his prior academic institutions or organizations, but he had expressed interest in participating, and we had several people in that position or category that had some expertise and were from academia or previously associated with academia. So that was his background.
I see. Thank you. Just curious.
Mm-hmm.
You may proceed.
Staff recommendation is to authorize the staff to proceed to public comment and hearing to incorporate EPA's 2016 freshwater selenium criteria as site-specific criteria in Virginia's Water Quality Standards Regulation 9 VAC 25-260, consistent with the petition request for the 4 tributaries in the Knox Creek drainage in Buchanan County.
I have a motion, I have a staff recommendation. I need a motion,
So move.
and I need a second.
Second.
And I have a second. Thank you, Mr. Kilgore. Any further discussion from this board? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just want to let you know lunch is here, so I don't know when you would like to take a break or if you would like to continue on with the agenda items before, if you would like to try to complete the meeting before taking a lunch break.
You know,
It's
I
up
have
to the
no
board.
idea what time it is, so it's 11:37, board. What do you feel like? Lunch is here.
He wants to keep going.
I'm kind of the
Not
long-distance
deciding for the board.
driver, so I'm with you on that one. So if the board,
Madam Chair, you
It's
have
okay.
the longest drive, so you
not as much today, but anyway, yes. I'd like to continue myself.
Yes, ma'am.
The rest of you okay?
Yep.
All right. So next, we're looking at tab K. Mr. Bryan? Sewage collection and treatment regulations, non-VAC 25-790, amendment to include a reporting requirement for all septic systems taken offline and connected to sewerage systems.
Good morning. I'm Joseph Bryan of the Office of IPPE's Permits, and as you just mentioned, we're looking at the sewage collection and treatment regulation, a proposed amendment, and we'll be asking that the board approve the draft amendments as a proposed regulation and proceed with public comment this morning. Just as some background, the proposed amendment was developed in response to the Phase 3 Watershed Implementation Plan, or WIP, for the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. The Phase 3 WIP was completed in August of 2019 with the goal to achieve nutrient and sediment reductions necessary to restore the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. It details best management practices and programmatic actions necessary to achieve state basin planning targets for nitrogen and phosphorus. One of the 56 initiatives identified in Chapter 7 of the Phase 3 WIP is Initiative 53, which requires reporting of sewer connections to wastewater or by wastewater utilities. The initiative states that the Commonwealth will initiate a regulatory action to amend the existing sewage collection and treatment regulations, 9 VAC 25-790-10 et sequitur, to include a reporting requirement for all septic systems or other on-site sewage disposal systems taken offline and connected to sewage collection systems. This requirement will ensure a more accurate count of nutrient reductions resulting from septic connected to sewer. In accordance with this initiative, a notice of intended regulatory action was published on September 11th of 2023 and ran through October 11th of 2023. The comment period was extended to December 6th due to issues related to a DEQ email address not accepting comments correctly. And let's see here, during a portion of the original comment period, and ultimately no comments were received for the NORA. A regulatory advisory panel was established and 2 RAP meetings were held, the first on February 29th and the second on April 12th of 2024. During those meetings, the primary issues discussed were the scope of Initiative 53, the existing tracking methods by localities, and whether they had any, and potential burden of the new requirements on localities. The result of the RAP meetings was the development of a new regulatory section to the SCAT regulation at 9 VAC 25-790-985. The proposed language states, on or before February 1st annually, every permitted wastewater treatment facility within the Chesapeake Bay watershed shall report to the department, to the best of their knowledge, the number of septic systems and other on-site sewage disposal systems taken offline and connected to sewerage systems that convey sewage to their facility during the previous calendar year. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions? I guess we have no questions.
All right.
Madam Chair, I move we accept the staff recommendation.
He hasn't
Oops,
given it.
I haven't gotten there
Okay.
yet. About to read it.
Scott, you need more candy?
Go ahead and give us
Okay.
the staff recommendation.
Staff recommends that the board approve the draft amendments to the sewage collection and treatment regulation, 9 VC 25790 as a proposed regulation, and to proceed with public comment.
Now I'll entertain a motion to accept staff recommendations.
So moved.
Gotcha. I need a second.
Second.
I've got a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Bryan.
Thank you much.
Moving on in your board book to tab L, Mr. Williams will be presenting a petition for rulemaking for the establishment of a regulation or policy interpreting the definition of a non-tidal wetland under non-VAC 25830-40 and non-VAC 25830-80 and Fairfax County Ordinances 118-6-1Q.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Justin Williams, and I will be wearing my other hat for our presentation at this point. I also manage, amongst the Office of Watersheds and Local Government Assistance, the Bay Act program, which is inclusive in the Local Government Assistance Program. Today, I will talk about the petition as presented to the board regarding non-tidal wetlands and its definition under the Chesapeake Bay Act and accompanying regulations, specifically providing the board a bit of a background on the Bay Act requirements, programs, and definitions, as well as the wetlands definitions and guidance under state law. Talk about the Supreme Court Sackets decisions, and of course, the results of the public participation process and a recommendation for the board. As a bit of a background, the Bay Act program was adopted in 1988 into the Virginia State Water Control Law, and then the accompanying regulations, the Chesapeake Bay designation, Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area Designation and Management Regulations were incorporated in 1989. Specifically, the Bay Act only applies to 84 defined tidewater localities as established in the State Water Control Law. That includes the 84 cities, counties, and towns largely east to the Interstate 95 divide and the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Generally, the framework is established by the Bay Act, and different than many of the other programs under DEQ's purview, is that the locality directly implements this program. DEQ provides oversight generally with the program and the localities and technical assistance, but does not individually review or approve projects or permits under the program. Among the requirements that are established under the Bay Act for localities and their programs is the identification of what's known as Chesapeake Bay preservation areas, which are largely made up of two areas. One is inclusive of resource protection areas. Those are lands adjacent to water bodies with perennial flow that have an intrinsic water quality value. And then resource management areas. Those that, if improperly used or developed, have the potential for significantly degrading water quality or the functional value of a resource protection area. There's also what's known as intensely developed areas, which are really overlays of resource protection areas, or areas in which there was significant historical development and therefore additional criteria may apply. Generally, the requirements as a land use planning and ordinance framework as laid out in the Act and regulations is that the locality must incorporate performance criteria or water quality protection measures into their plans, ordinances, and policies, inclusive of their comprehensive plans, their zoning and subdivision ordinances, and their overall plan of development review processes when reviewing proposed projects and proposals within these Chesapeake Bay preservation areas. Because these areas are important, localities must, under the requirements, provide and adopt a map which provides a general guide for the identification of these areas within a locality. Specifically, moving on to resource protection areas, which were the subject of the petition, and those definitions, resource protection areas include tidal wetlands and shores, non-tidal wetlands connected by surface flow and contiguous to surface bodies with perennial flow, and those lands designated by the locality necessary to protect water quality. Specifically, most of the Chesapeake Bay program and its requirements are focused on the other portion of the RPA definition, which includes a 100-foot vegetative buffer adjacent to those features along both sides of any water body. There is, as a part of the requirements, the necessity for a site-specific delineation of the boundaries and the extent of a resource protection area during a plan review process, which is more specific for that parcel than provided for by the map adopted by localities. Where you have a resource protection area in these localities, their activities and modifications to those areas are more limited, and there are specific allowances for the types of activities and criteria that must be met for any development or proposed activities in those resource protection areas. Turning to the petition before the board, it was specifically related to a request to establish a regulation or policy interpreting the definition of non-tidal wetlands under the Bay Act regulations. There were three components to it, as presented in the board materials and on the slide. The first related to resource protection area buffer management, and specifically reliance on a specific manual to determine and identify non-tidal wetlands. The second request related to and incorporated into the petition was around resource protection area buffer management and reliance on specific manuals, again to determine the extent and definition of a non-tidal wetland, and the specific language provided in the board materials and on the slide. The final element was a specific recommendation to a revision for the definition of a non-tidal wetland under the Bay Act program, with specific references to factors and regional supplements that should replace existing language. To provide additional information with regards to the petition and this request, looking at the definition of of non-tidal wetlands and wetlands under the state law, Virginia State Code specifically provides the definition of wetlands. As outlined there, those wetlands are those areas that are inundated and saturated by surface or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support, and that under normal circumstances do support, a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions, and that generally provide wetlands include swamps, marshes, bogs, and similar areas. When you have a wetland, they are then generally identified as either being tidal or non-tidal, depending on their nature. And the Bay Act, by virtue of overseeing these features, does have overlap with other programs and requirements, including, as outlined in the image here, the wetlands program itself, which is responsible for delineating and identifying wetlands. To that end, the specific Bay Act regulations define non-tidal wetlands at 9 VAC 83040, and it mirrors the state code with only the addition of the phrase "other than tidal wetlands." Additionally, the Virginia Wetland Protection Permit Program and those regulations mirror the Virginia Code and the Bay Act's regulatory definition of non-tidal wetlands as well, again, all referencing the specific language provided in state code. Inclusive in the Bay Act program and the Wetlands program are additional information, guidance, and technical assistance for wetlands identification and its definition. The Bay Act implementation guidance underscores that reliance on the Wetlands program for delineation is key. The Bay Act does not separately create or identify wetlands. Primarily, it adds the additional buffer requirement of 100 feet along wetlands, or identifies those wetlands that are connected or contiguous as being part of a resource protection area. State law and guidance directs the use of highly detailed and technical guidance established by both DEQ and the Corps, and DEQ underscores the technical and very specific nature of this through its wetland certification program. Several questions arose, and as part of what was referenced in the petition is the Supreme Court's decision in Sackett versus EPA, which did reference wetlands under the Clean Water Act and found and determined that it extends only to those wetlands with a contiguous surface connection to bodies that are waters of the U.S. in their own right, such as they are indistinguishable from those waters. But that decision focused only on the extent of federal jurisdictions of wetlands under the Clean Water Act. And in fact, that decision did not change the underlying technical definition or specific definition of wetlands. And it was entirely based upon federal law and did not alter or change Virginia law. Indeed, after the Sackett decision, DEQ issued a memo to provide additional clarity that neither state law nor the wetlands regulation is affected by the Sackett decision. Inclusive of that was also the recognition in language that it did not affect the definition of resource protection areas and resource management areas as defined in the Bay Act and the associated regulations. Therefore, as outlined, Sackett did not have an impact on the definition or extent of wetlands as identified or outlined in any of the programs in Virginia. As required under the APA for a petition, there was a public participation process. Outlined here is the comment summary, and included in the board materials are those comments that were provided. There were no comments provided in support of the petition to change the definition. There were 36 commenters who provided 32 separate comments in opposition, and there you see the opposing rationale, recognizing that Sackett did not warrant regulatory amendment, that DEQ regulations and guidance regarding delineations are sufficiently clear, that localities exercise their discretion in the Bay Act authority and the pending matter that was the subject of the petition, that the board should not intervene during pending locality decisions, that Sackett did not change technical considerations for RPA delineations, and that the Bay Act program is set up and operating as intended to address any locality Bay Act issues. Additionally, the comments noted that the requested definition would undermine protection for wetlands, which are important for absorbing water, maintaining ecosystems, and providing critical habitat. Amongst those commenters mentioned, there were 17 organizations, non-governmental entities outlined here, who provided comments and are included in the board's material. Therefore, the department's conclusion for the board is that the requests number 1 and 2, as identified in the position and presented to the board, are best addressed through technical assistance and guidance to the locality, which DEQ does provide on a range of issues, including delineations, procedures for delineations, and the requirement of site-specific delineations that are current and are not based or that are required to be used over general maps. But DEQ, as noted under the framework, additionally, pursuant to these requests in the petition, does not step into the shoes of a locality. We do not replace or supersede those decisions. With regards to request number 3, it is a proposed definition change. But as mentioned, that definition is inconsistent with state law and is not necessary as requested, and in particular is not necessary because of the Sackett decision by the Supreme Court. So with that, if there are any questions by the board.
A question. So, I mean, all this came about because they wanted to build a hockey rink, correct, near the water, I guess. And so our board action today, what you're asking us to do is just take no action on the petition and leave it to the locality to decide?
Correct.
What technical assistance are we going to give the locality here?
So we have actually been requested by Fairfax subsequent to the decision to come and meet with the review committee, provide additional technical assistance and guidance. The department, although frequently engaged by localities, was not engaged on this particular action prior to a decision, but we would follow up, and oftentimes most of the staff time is spent providing individual guidance, project reviews, sites assistance to localities, and that's a big part of our program. And that's what we would continue to do here. But specifically, this petition ultimately results in requesting a change to the definition of non-tidal wetlands, which is even beyond a locality-specific decision and would actually impact decisions across all 84 localities and be inconsistent with state law.
I was just making sure we were going to assist them and
absolutely
try to get to a solution for them.
Absolutely.
I understand that the Fairfax County Wetlands Board may not have formally submitted comments, but they are opposed to this petition as well.
Correct. We did not receive any separate comments during the comment period from that body.
Any more questions, comments?
And so therefore, as mentioned, the specific staff recommendation related to the petition is that DEQ recommends the board not initiate a rulemaking in response to this petition.
Madam Chairman, I move that we accept the staff recommendation.
I have a motion, I need a second. Second. I've got a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries to deny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other business before the board is an update on non-VAC 15-60 in response to HB 206. That's Director Rolban.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Cameron asked for this last time. At our last session, it was in the Secretary of Natural Resources Office for review. Since then, on May 13th, we submitted to the Office of Attorney General. They certified as correct on May 17th, and now it's at the Department of Planning and Budget. Today is day 39. They have 45 days. They have had 2 rounds of questions with our staff, and we're hopeful that by day 45, they will send it on to the Office of Regulatory Management.
When is that 45th day, Mike? When on the calendar?
Well, today's 39, so 6 more days.
Oh, 6 more days.
Yeah.
Cool.
But it could take longer.
Oh,
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much, Director Rolban. Next on our agenda, we have a report to the board regarding controversial permitting or permits. Mr. Morris, that would be the Prince Edward County, Virginia Water Protection, VWP number 21-1912, and the Sandy River Reservoir.
Madam Chair and members of the board, I'm actually going to give you 2 updates today. One is going to be the Prince Edwards, but one is also going to be the Advanced 6. The Prince Edward update is going to go ahead and just give you a synopsis of the decision made by the department. It's no longer an action before the department. And just as a reminder, this is a requirement for us to give you an update on controversial permits, but for clarification, the Prince Edward permit is not an update on controversial permits. A decision has been made.
Okay.
Like you mentioned before, we're going to do an update on Prince Edward's Virginia Water Protection Permit number 21-1912, the Sandy River Reservoir. Just as a general reminder of the last update, this is the general geographical area of that intake and withdrawal. This is a closer viewpoint of that. And this is just a synopsis of all the events to date. Draft permit was submitted to the applicant on September 5th, 2023. Public comment period started on September 21st, 2023 and closed on October 23rd, 2023. DEQ granted the request for a public hearing on December 27th, 2023. Draft public hearing was held March 5th. Summary of comments public hearing was held on April 24th, 2024. And a final action by the department was made on May 17th, 2024. And that decision was to grant the permit. Next, I'd like to transition to, any questions on those actions taken by the department for that permit?
Anyone have any questions, comments? Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Continue, please.
I'll transition to the controversial permit. It is before the board right now, Advanced 6 Resin and Chemical LLC in Hopewell. This is just a restatement of the previous comment that I had, which is this is a requirement to update the board on any controversial permit, including water permit actions for which a public hearing has been granted by the department. And this update serves to meet that requirement of 10.1-1184-1B. And again, I'm going to give you an update on Advanced 6 Resin and Chemicals LLC in Hopewell, VPDS permit VA 0005291. And as previously provided, this is a general area we're talking about for the Commonwealth. And this is the location and the site conditions of the permitted facility. And I want to briefly go over some of the proposed enhancements to the permit, just give you an idea of what was incorporated into the next permit revision. We did include toxicity testing for all stormwater outfalls. We have a SEEP response plan, a stormwater conveyance system study, additional groundwater monitoring for the marine ops area, enhanced inspection and housekeeping in the ammonium sulfate storage and handling and transport area, adaptive management plan for some of the stormwater, some very specific marine operation improvements. Building 12, stormwater elimination was incorporated into this permit. The stormwater containment elimination plan was incorporated into the permit. And there's also an 80% reduction in all ammonia allocations, resulted in a very more restrictive ammonia limit. And also, this permit has additional cooling water intake structure requirements as required by 316B of the Clean Water Act. Now I'd like to go over some of the concerns and requests for public hearing. These are broken into general categories, so I'm not going to go every specific comment, but we'll give you a general summary. Some concerns regarding the length of compliance schedule timeframes for upgrades, lack of consideration regarding PFAS in the draft permit, potential for impacts from water withdrawals of fragile species, potential impacts to the James River drinking water supplies, concerns regarding the facility's compliance history, requests for new thermal effects and mixing zone studies, and opposition to the discharge of industrial wastewater, requests for limitations and more frequent stormwater monitoring discharges, requests for additional limitations and increased monitoring on industrial wastewater discharges, requests to extend the public comment period, and general requests for a public hearing. Now I'm going to go over some general timeframes, and I might circle back to a couple of those comments just to give you an update on some of the additional considerations that were done reflecting these timeframes. The draft permit was submitted to the applicant on June 13, 2023. Draft permit submitted to EPA on June 16, 2023. Public outreach meeting was held in the Hopewell area on September 21st, 2023. Public comment period from October 31st to 2023 to November 30th, 2023. And DEQ did grant the request for a public hearing on December 19th, 2023. And then subsequently, the permit requested that the permit be revised to accelerate some of the compliance schedules. As background to that, the existing or the preceding permit had in there a multi-permit term compliance schedule. The permittee proposed some additional process improvements to accelerate that to within one permit term, so that's why that revision was incorporated. And subsequently, DEQ revised the permit and submitted to EPA on March 15th. A draft public hearing was held on, permit public hearing was held on May 21st, 2024. And we're proposing, well, the public comment period was from April 19th of 2024 to June 5th, 2024. And we're proposing to have a summary of comments public hearing sometime in August 2024. And then the final action by the department is expected late summer, fall of 2024. So I'm going to go back right now real quick to go over a couple of these concerns, and then also just kind of reflect then that most of those concerns were addressed in the proposed enhancement to the permit. As you can see here, they had concerns regarding length of compliance schedules, timelines for upgrades. The permittee actually made that request to accelerate that, so that's incorporated into the new permit term. Lack of consideration regarding PFAS in the draft permit. As you guys may be familiar, we recently had chapters 316 and 314 of the 2024 Virginia Acts of Assembly, House Bill 1085 and Senate Bill 243 requires DEQ to develop a priority plan for PFAS assessments. And that is to identify sources of PFAS in public water systems, raw water sources where PFAS is in finished water drinking supplies, where there have been detections above the PFAS maximum contamination level, or MCL. Facilities going forward, once they're identified in these, they will have a determination made whether they need additional self-monitoring or anything they needed to be changed in the permit conditions for those facilities, including monitoring parameters. We recently got approval in the budget to have 3 positions hired on that will be incorporating those roles. And so in part of that consultation with VDH, if a facility is identified as potentially a source, they will be placed in that prioritization plan. For potential impacts for water withdrawals and fragile species, that goes into the benefits that were incorporated into the requirements of the Clean Water Intake Structure for the Clean Water Act. That is protective of those. And then potential impacts to James River drinking water supplies. This is a reissuance, so any of those existing impacts have already been incorporated prior to the issuance process. The fact that this permit is a lot more restrictive on the permittees, then those water quality has a level of improvement per se. This permit is currently been administratively continued for, I want to say 1,060 days. So it's been almost 3 years since this permit has been or should have been reissued. And so these additional improvements to the permit will improve the James River water quality, not be a detriment to those based off the existing permit requirements. And concerns regarding the facility compliance history. Compliance is done on a case-by-case basis. That is not something we have a concern with for this facility. And a request for new thermal effects and mixing zone studies. The existing mixing zone studies and thermal effects studies is, I think, a decade old. They're still valid based off when they were done. If the permit D does decide to do an additional study, we'll be glad to incorporate those findings in any type of permit decision we have. And then the other one is just a general opposition to any discharge. As I mentioned before, this is already a pre-existing discharge, not a new proposed discharge. And then request for limitations on more frequent stormwater monitoring and discharges. As you go back to this, you can see that the permit has a lot of requirements associated with eliminating seeps, doing some adaptive management for stormwater, doing additional monitoring for stormwater, basically having a lot of stormwater management practices incorporated into permit requirements. So that was addressed. And then some of the additional requirements were just a general comment to have public comment period and a general request for public hearing, which the department did listen to and did authorize. With that, I'll open myself up to any questions you guys may have.
What kind of support or what is the view of the Hopewell leadership?
So there were some concerns within the industrial facility, most air discharges, water discharges, general concerns with open and honest communications with the community, making sure that they're aware of what's going on and that Advanced 6 takes appropriate action when there is an issue. So honestly, I think the proposed clarifications, enhancements to the permit are well received by the community. Obviously, they would like more. There are some constraints on allowing permits to have incorporations of requirements that are achievable during the 5-year permit term. And so what we've structured here in the permit is something that we think is practical, that will achieve higher water quality standards from the discharge. And I think in general it's well received. Obviously, the community would like to see more as time progresses, but that's for the next permit term, in my opinion.
But is the leadership of Hopewell supportive
of the facility or the enhancements?
permit?
I think they're generally in supportive of the enhancement of the permit. Like I mentioned before, I think they would like to see a little bit more done, but when DEQ evaluates these, they also look at the practical nature of the enhancements to the permit D, if they're able to be achieved during that 5-year permit term. And I think the plan that we've structured allows that to occur, and I think once these are achieved at the next permit term, we can look at the reissuance and see if there's anything else we can do to further enhance the water quality and discharge. And I think that also will be well received by Hopewell.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions or comments from Mr. Morris? Thank you. Next in your agenda is an update on Mountain Valley Pipeline. Melanie Davenport, thank you.
Is that on?
Is unusual for me.
Better,
That's
much
better.
better.
No.
Nope.
Ah, how about that?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So at your last board meeting in February, you received comments from a number of individuals during public forum regarding the Mountain Valley Pipeline. There were some questions asked and some issues raised. And as a result of that, we were asked to provide an update to you at this board meeting, and I am delivering that update. So project status, the pipeline was placed in service on June 14th, which means there is gasoline, good Lord, there is natural gas flowing through that pipeline. That means that all water body and wetland crossings, pipe welding, and hydrostatic testing was completed before the gas began to flow. And we are expecting through 2024 final grade restoration and stabilization activities continuing. This is a shot of what restoration, post-construction restoration looks like. And in Virginia, about 64% of the right-of-way has been restored. And those are just a couple sample photographs of what post-construction restoration looks like. I also wanted to give you an update on compliance activities, and this covers the last quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024. We engaged in 84 complaint investigations, conducted almost 1,000 compliance inspections. About 114 of those were completed by DEQ staff, and 882 were completed by our third-party compliance inspectors. We noted corrective actions for 364 items, and we collected stipulated penalties both for the fourth quarter of 2023 and the first quarter of 2024, and those stipulated penalty amounts are up there, $34,000 and $31,500. And we're currently evaluating stipulated penalties owed for the second quarter of 2024. I don't think that all of you were members of the board during some of the early discussions on Mountain Valley Pipeline, so I just wanted to provide a little bit of background information on the judicial consent decree of 2019 and what it means when we talk about stipulated penalties under that decree. So that decree sets out stipulated penalty amounts for 12 enumerated violations. And examples of those violations are situations where routine maintenance of E&S control measures were not taken within a specified time frame, if certain erosion and sediment control or stormwater practices weren't properly installed, if our inspectors noticed denuded areas or stockpiles of soil that weren't stabilized, if reports weren't submitted in a timely manner, and if stipulated penalties weren't paid. What you'll see is that the vast majority of those enumerated violations really go to the substance of implementing best management practices, staying on top of them, making sure they're installed properly and operating properly. They don't relate to violations of water quality standards. There is one category of stipulated penalties, which relates to a release of sediment into surface waters, and that penalty is based on the extent of that, whether it's acreage of impact to wetlands or linear feet. And penalties are primarily in the range of $500 to $2,500 per day per violation. So again, the point of this is to drive attention to those practices in the field and make sure that they are addressed in a timely manner and appropriately. There were two issues that I believe were brought to your attention by several of the commenters during the public forum in February. The first was referred to as Sinking Creek. And this is a situation where at the end of January, sediment-laden water began flowing basically from that spring box in the picture located in the town of Newport, and that sediment found its way into Sinking Creek. This happened in the town of Newport, which was about 2,000 feet from the right-of-way. What we know was at the time there was an underground boring being conducted to cross a stream, underneath a stream. The bore pit was being dewatered, and there was a dewatering feature off the right-of-way. So somewhere, either during that under-stream boring or related to that dewatering feature, there was a connection to the karst topography in the area. We had the state DCR karst specialist was out there working with the MVP karst specialists. They did some dye testing, and they really weren't able to ascertain exactly where in that construction activity the connection to karst was. Once that boring was complete and the dewatering was complete, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, that sediment in the water resolved itself. So as you can see, that top one on the left is the sediment-laden water as it entered Sinking Creek from that spring box. And then the bottom right are compliance inspectors did put some measures in place to trap as much of that sediment discharge as possible. By the beginning of February, the water began to clear, and again, that coincided with the completion of the bore and the end of the need to have that further dewatering, so that by the middle of February, we were seeing clear water again in Sinking Creek. The other thing that I believe you heard about from the commenters was a break in the pipeline during hydrostatic testing. So hydrostatic testing is kind of that last step before a pipeline is put into service, where clean water is pumped through the pipeline at very, very high pressure, and at a pressure significantly higher than what the operating pressure will be for that line. And a section of the pipe burst and released test water during that testing. So I have a hard time kind of envisioning it, but this pipe was buried 6 to 8 feet. The break occurred, so the water was under high pressure, and it shot up through the ground, and it carried with it a lot of the sediment that was burying the pipe. So what we saw was a release of turbid water, which reached an unnamed trib to Mill Creek. And that release went on for about 12 hours. And there was also sediment deposited in a wetland and stream just below that point, again, because of the pressure that the pipe was under. The downstream waterway was cleared and returned to normal levels after that. Well, so I guess the water was stopped in the pipeline because there's different valves in the pipeline. So they stopped the pressure, the pressurized water. They had crews out in that wetland area where the deposited sediment was retrieved the next day. And these are pictures of that immediate restoration of the disturbed area. And June 20th picture, we were hoping that we would see perhaps a greener vision, but with the low precipitation. But basically, hydrostatic testing resumed on May 10th, and the pipe passed the testing. Where are we? Where is DEQ in the process of this project going forward? According to either the Upland 401 certification that this board issued or the individual VWP permit that this board issued, there is a requirement to monitor progress of final grading, stabilization, and restoration, and that occurs through 2 growing cycles for vegetative cover. So we will continue to monitor and inspect to make sure that that vegetative cover does in fact grow. There are requirements in the karst mitigation plan for Mountain Valley to conduct some aerial LIDAR post-construction, just to get a sense of the karst conditions after construction. And then the wetland mitigation framework requires monitoring for up to 3 years to make sure that those riparian zones have returned to a native state post-construction. As I said, we will continue to have staff available for complaint investigation as these post-construction restoration activities take place. And finally, just wanted to note that pipeline installation, operation, and safety is handled by either the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, also called FEMSHA, which is a unit of the United States Department of Transportation. So with that, are there any questions?
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Davenport?
Thanks for a nice report.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Next, we have future meeting dates. Ms. Porterfield?
Yes, we have not determined the next date, but stay tuned. I'll be communicating the next date. We're looking sometime in the fall.
Okay. And now we're going to move on to public forum, which we have said in our board book, we're not going to exceed 45 minutes, and no comment on Mountain Valley Pipeline. So members of the public may address the board on matters of those on the agenda or pending regulatory actions. The total time allotted for public comment will not exceed 45 minutes, and those persons wishing to address the board during this time should indicate their desire on the sign-in card sheets and limit their presentations to 3 minutes or less. There is no pooling of minutes during the public forum, and each speaker's elapsed time will appear on the screen. Speakers will also receive notification from the chairperson when the time has expired. If there are 15 speakers?
No, ma'am. There's 2.
2 speakers, okay. If you or you have commented and been covered by a previous commenter, it is appropriate to simply state that you agree with the previous commenter and leave it at that. So, Ms. Porterfield, I'll give you time to call those commenters.
Yes, ma'am. First speaker this morning is Jessica Sims with Appalachian Voices. If you'd come to the podium, please. We can't hear you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the board. Again, Jessica Sims representing Appalachian Voices. Wanted to make you all aware, in December of 2023, Equitrans announced a redesign of their Southgate pipeline extension. This would run through Pittsylvania County. They included a revision to the route length, the pipe diameter, and the capacity of the pipeline. So the focus will soon again be on state-level permits required for this project. They do have their federal CPCN from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But as of how the project stands now, it is redesigned, and it is wholly unique from its original design in 2018. It still impacts the Dan River Basin, though, in Pittsylvania County. You may recall Southgate was unable to obtain their state-level permits in 2021. In Virginia, their air permit application was rejected owing to the disproportionate impact Southgate's compressor station would have had on the surrounding community. In North Carolina, their water permit was rejected after the North Carolina DEQ determined that work on the Southgate permit could lead to unnecessary water quality impacts and disturbance of the environment there. The previous DEQ director, Paler, decided to waive Southgate's water quality certification in Virginia between 2018 and 2020. I respectfully ask that given this administration's focus on increasing public transparency, that there be a public hearing and a comment period on the water permit, that DEQ please do a full water quality certification process, that the board support this process and ask for updates from the agency, and that the public be involved in what will be a controversial project. This is at the discretion of the DEQ and Director Rollband. It's been more than 4 years since that permit was waived, so it would be appropriate for a new review and fresh eyes on a revised project. At this time, it's unclear how Southgate intends to transport gas, as they've not announced plans for new compressor stations. It's especially important as we've spent the last 10 years witnessing diminishment of an opportunity for public engagement, a disservice done to communities in Giles, Craig, Roanoke, Montgomery, Franklin, and Pennsylvania for an affiliated but separate project. DEQ will also, in North Carolina, will also soon be reviewing the same impacts to their water quality. As your decisions have a major impact on the public, I would encourage any opportunity to increase the chance for the public to weigh in on projects that would impact them, and again, respectfully ask for a full review of the Southgate pipeline project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Next commenter.
Next speaker is Joshua Vanna with Artivism, Virginia.
a message from the mountains that I won't be specifically speaking to, but I just wanted to get it into the hands of someone who would read it, hopefully. My name is Joshua Vanna, currently live in Albemarle County, and I've been working with folks in Southwest Virginia and West Virginia for about 8 years to defend themselves from being railroaded by a project which shall not be named. I used to come in front of these boards. Don't look at it if you don't want to know. I used to come in front of these boards and say things like, commerce is not your job, and then I would get dragged out by Chesterfield County Police or State Police or whatever. And I've learned so much during my 8 years of advocacy and listening. Listening is an important thing. But I've learned so much, and one of those things is that I've learned that commerce really is your job. It is your job. And as George Bancroft, if there are any Navy heads in the room here, they might recognize that name, and I think he was the first Secretary of the Navy, but I learned about these words that were inscribed over a doorway at the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C., something to the effect of commerce defies every wind, outrides every tempest, and invades every zone, and it certainly does invade every zone, and that is the reality that many of my friends and colleagues are living right now in Southwest Virginia at the hands of a project which shall not be named. We will see if commerce can withstand the power of gravity and moisture in a terrain which it is not suited for. Later this week, we will get our first rain in Southwest Virginia, first substantial rain maybe in about a month. And I would ask that if there's anyone on the board or working at the DEQ who is a praying person, that you begin your prayers now to pray for the people who have been railroaded by this board and DEQ for 7 years to help along the project which shall not be named. I am glad to hear that there are new erosion and stormwater sediment regs going on the books, and I would suggest that they not be kept around the toilet paper roll like they have been seemingly in reference to the project which shall not be named for the last 7 years. Here we are again. Listening is really important, and it may be the case that very, very soon, lack of listening indicates a lack of sense.
Mr. Vanna, we appreciate you. Thank you for coming today.
I don't think you do appreciate me.
You're completed, finished. Thank you.
We're still here after 10 years, and we're not going away.
Mr. Vanna, take your seat, please.
Sir, we gave you the courtesy of listening to you. Your time is up, so thank you, sir. I don't think anybody interrupted you, sir, so please sit down.
Y'all have diminished and dismissed and lied to us for 7 years.
Mr. Vanna.
That's not what I would call courtesy.
Mr. Vanna.
The equivalent of what you do after we talk is you crumple up our comments and
This board is adjourned.